May 1st, 1960, 8:53 a.m. Moscow time. Altitude 70,500 feet above the Ural Mountains. Temperature outside -70 degrees Fahrenheit. Francis Gary Powers sits in the cockpit of a U-2 reconnaissance aircraft traveling at 460 miles per hour over Sverdlovsk, deep inside Soviet territory. 30 years old, former Air Force pilot, CIA employee for 4 years, mission number 27. Through the drift sight below his feet, he can see the Soviet Union spread out like a map. Industrial complexes, military installations, missile sites. The camera in the equipment bay behind him clicks every few seconds, recording everything. Each photograph is worth more than gold to American intelligence. Powers checks his instruments. Fuel sufficient. Oxygen flow normal. Outside air pressure 0.04 pounds per square inch. Unbreathable. Fatal in 15 seconds without the pressure suit that encases his body like a second skin. 300 miles inside hostile airspace. Soviet radar has been tracking him since he crossed the border from Pakistan 1 hour and 17 minutes ago. He knows this. The mission planners know this. The assumption is simple. No Soviet weapon can reach him at this altitude. The assumption is wrong. At 8:55 a.m., 14 SA-2 guideline surface-to-air missiles launch from sites around Sverdlovsk. 14 white contrails rising from the ground at 3 times the speed of sound. Powers doesn't see them. At 70,000 feet, you can't look down and see missiles coming up. You can only wait. One missile reaches its maximum altitude 600 feet behind the U-2, at the extreme limit of its range, at the edge of what Soviet radar can track. It detonates. The shockwave hits the aircraft like an invisible fist. The U-2, built of aluminum thin as paper to save weight, crumples. The tail section separates. The aircraft enters an uncontrolled spin. Powers has 2 options: activate the aircraft's self-destruct mechanism or eject. He has 70 seconds before the U-2 falls below 20,000 feet, and the pressure suit becomes irrelevant because Soviet soldiers will be waiting on the ground. He reaches for the destruct switches, but the spin pins him against the canopy. G-forces make his arms weigh 60 pounds each. He can't reach the controls. 45 seconds. He tries to eject, but ejection seats in the U-2 don't work like fighter jets. The seat fires downward, through the floor, into the propeller arc. Pilots are supposed to separate from the aircraft first, then use the seat as a last resort. But the spin makes separation impossible. 20 seconds. Powers makes his decision. He releases his seat harness, opens the canopy, gets sucked out of the aircraft at 35,000 feet, traveling 300 miles per hour. His parachute opens automatically at 15,000 feet. Soviet farmers watch him descend into a field near the village of Kosalino. When he lands, they approach cautiously. One asks in Russian, "Are you American?" Powers, trained to lie, trained to resist, trained to use the poison needle hidden in a silver dollar in his pocket if capture seems certain, tells the truth. Yes. Within 3 hours, KGB officers arrive. Within 6 hours, Powers is in Moscow. Within 4 days, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev will stand before the Supreme Soviet and reveal to the world that the United States has been conducting illegal spy flights over the USSR for 4 years, and that they have the pilot, alive, talking, confessing everything. The incident will destroy a peace summit, nearly trigger World War III, and bury Francis Gary Powers in a controversy that will follow him to his grave. But the story doesn't start on May 1st, 1960. It starts 7 years earlier in the mountains of Virginia, where a man named Richard Bizzle
had a problem that seemed impossible to solve.
1953. Central Intelligence Agency Headquarters, Langley, Virginia. Richard Bissell, Deputy Director for Plans, sits in a windowless briefing room looking at photographs of the Soviet Union. Except there aren't enough photographs. The USSR is 6.6 million square miles, the largest country on Earth, and American intelligence can see maybe 2% of it. U.S. reconnaissance aircraft fly along Soviet borders. They photograph what they can reach, coastal installations, border regions, but the interior remains invisible. The places where the Soviets build their bombers, their missiles, their nuclear weapons, those places are 1,000 miles from any border, unreachable. Strategic Air Command wants to know how many bombers the Soviets have. The Pentagon wants to know where their missile sites are located. The President wants to know if the bomber gap and missile gap that politicians talk about are real or imaginary. Nobody knows. Satellites don't exist yet. Human intelligence inside the USSR is almost non-existent. The Soviet Union is a black box, and black boxes are dangerous when they might contain hundreds of nuclear weapons pointed at American cities. Bissell needs an aircraft that can fly over the Soviet Union at an altitude no Soviet weapon can reach, for long enough to photograph hundreds of miles of territory, and light enough to take off from short runways in remote locations where the CIA operates in secret. The Air Force says it's impossible. Their reconnaissance aircraft, converted bombers like the RB-47, can fly high but not high enough. Soviet MiG A-17 fighters can reach 55,000 feet. Soviet anti-aircraft missiles can reach 60,000 feet. Any aircraft flying reconnaissance missions over the USSR will be shot down, unless it flies at 70,000 feet, above the fighters, above the missiles, above everything. In 1954, Bissell approaches Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, specifically a legendary designer named Clarence Kelly Johnson, who runs a semi-secret division called Advanced Development Projects. Pilots call it the Skunk Works. Johnson has designed some of the most advanced aircraft in the world: the P-38 Lightning, the F-80 Shooting Star, the F-104 Starfighter. Bissell gives Johnson the requirements: 70,000 feet altitude, 4,000-mile range, payload bay for cameras weighing 700 pounds, must be invisible to radar, and must be ready to fly in 8 months. Johnson says yes. His design is unconventional. Take the fuselage of the F-104 Starfighter, remove the swept wings, replace them with long straight wings like a glider. 104 feet wingspan on a fuselage only 63 feet long. Single engine, no ejection seat. Landing gear that falls off after takeoff. The aircraft lands on a skid like a sailplane. Weight is everything. Every pound costs altitude. The fuselage is aluminum, so thin you can dent it with your thumb. No armor, no weapons, no defensive systems. The only defense is altitude. The Air Force evaluators reject Johnson's design. Too unconventional, too fragile. The landing gear system is insane. But Bissell doesn't work for the Air Force. He works for the CIA. And the CIA approves the design. 20 aircraft. Budget, $22 million. Codename, Project Aquatone. The aircraft designation, U-2. The U stands for utility, a deliberate misnomer. Nothing about this aircraft is utilitarian. 8 months later, in August 1955, the first U-2 flies at Groom Lake, Nevada, the remote Air Force facility that would later become famous as Area 51. Test pilot Tony LaVere takes it to 52,000 feet on the first flight. Within weeks, the U-2 reaches 74,500 feet, exceeding even Kelly Johnson's predictions. The aircraft works, but it's not easy to fly. The U-2 operates in what pilots call the coffin corner, the narrow margin between stalling and overspeeding at extreme altitude. At 70,000 feet, the margin of error is 6 knots. 6 knots too slow, the aircraft stalls and falls. 6 knots too fast, the aircraft tears itself apart. Landing is worse. The long wings generate so much lift that the U-2 doesn't want to touch down. Pilots must stall the aircraft 6 inches above the runway. Get it wrong by 2 inches, and the aircraft bounces back into the air. Bounce 3 times, and the landing gear collapses. The CIA begins recruiting pilots, not from the military. Too many questions, too much paperwork. They recruit recently separated Air Force pilots. Officially, these men will work for Lockheed as test pilots. Unofficially, they will fly reconnaissance missions over the Soviet Union for the CIA.
The pay is extraordinary. $2,500 per month, equivalent to $28,000 in 2025 dollars, plus hazard pay for missions over hostile territory. The pilots sign secrecy agreements. Tell no one what you do, not your wife, not your parents. If you're shot down, the government will deny you exist. Francis Gary Powers is 26 years old when the CIA recruits him in 1956. Born August 17, 1929, in Jenkins, Kentucky. Son of a coal miner. Graduated from Milligan College in Tennessee. Joined the Air Force in 1950. Flew F-84 Thunderjets in the 468th Strategic Fighter Squadron. Powers is not the best pilot in his squadron, not the most aggressive, not the natural stick and rudder talent, but he's methodical, careful, follows procedures exactly. The kind of pilot who double-checks every switch before engine start and triple-checks fuel calculations. For fighter pilots, this makes him boring. For reconnaissance pilots, this makes him perfect. Powers accepts the CIA's offer. In May 1956, he reports to Groom Lake for U-2 training. 6 weeks of flying a jet-powered glider at altitudes where the sky turns purple-black and you can see the curvature of the earth. Learning to breathe through a pressure suit. Learning to eat through a tube. Learning to urinate through a catheter because missions last 9 hours and there's no bathroom at 70,000 feet. In December 1956, Powers completes training. The CIA sends him to Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. His cover story? Civilian test pilot for Lockheed, evaluating high-altitude weather phenomena. His real job? Photographing the Soviet Union. Between 1956 and 1960, Powers flies 27 reconnaissance missions over denied territory. Not all over the USSR, some over Eastern Europe, some over China, some over the Middle East, but enough over Soviet airspace that he knows the risk, knows that Soviet radar tracks him, knows that Soviet fighters scramble to intercept him, knows they can't reach him. Until May 1st, 1960, when one finally does.
April 30th, 1960, 11 p.m., Mission Briefing Room, Peshawar Air Station, Pakistan. Powers sits with his pressure suit technician going through the pre-flight checklist. The suit weighs 30 pounds, silver fabric with rubber seals at the wrists, ankles, and neck. Helmet with gold-tinted faceplate, oxygen hoses, communication cables. The suit is uncomfortable, claustrophobic, but at 70,000 feet, where atmospheric pressure is 1/20th of sea level, the suit is the only thing keeping his blood from boiling. The mission parameters are straightforward. Take off from Peshawar, Pakistan. Fly north across Afghanistan. Enter Soviet airspace near the border with Uzbekistan. turn northeast toward Tyuratam, where the Soviets are building their main missile test facility, what will later become the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Continue northeast to Sverdlovsk, an industrial center where intelligence suggests the Soviets are manufacturing ballistic missiles. Then northwest to Plesetsk, another suspected missile site. Exit Soviet airspace over Murmansk. Land in Bordeaux, Norway. Total distance, 3,788 miles. Total time in Soviet airspace, approximately 4 hours and 30 minutes. Total time at altitude above 70,000 feet, where Soviet fighters cannot reach, the entire mission. The weather forecast is perfect. Clear skies over Central Asia. Winds light and variable. Visibility unlimited. May 1st is a Soviet holiday. May Day, the International Workers' Celebration. Half the Soviet military will be at parades. Radar operators will be understaffed. Air defense commanders will be distracted. Perfect conditions for what the CIA calls an overflight. Powers signs the mission acceptance form, eats a high-protein meal designed to minimize waste during the 9-hour flight, uses the bathroom one final time. At 1 a.m., technicians help him into the pressure suit. The process takes 40 minutes. Seal the legs, seal the arms, check the gloves, check the helmet, connect oxygen, connect communications, inflate the suit to 3 pounds per square inch, and check for leaks.
At 2:30 a.m., Powers walks to the U-2. The aircraft sits on the runway like a giant black crow. Fuselage, 63 feet long, painted midnight blue to reduce visibility against the sky. Wings, 104 feet across, so long they droop at the tips when the aircraft sits on the ground. Weight when fueled, 17,000 pounds, of which 11,000 pounds is fuel in tanks built into the wings. Powers climbs the ladder, lowers himself into the cockpit. The cockpit is tiny, designed for a pilot in a pressure suit with no room to spare. Instrument panel directly in front, throttle on the left, control stick in the center. Drift sight below his feet for navigation and camera aiming. No radar, no weapons, no defensive countermeasures. The only protection is altitude. Ground crew connects external power. Powers begins the engine start sequence. Pratt & Whitney J57 turbojet, 17,000 pounds of thrust at sea level. At 70,000 feet, where air density is 1/20th of sea level, the engine produces barely 2,000 pounds of thrust. Enough to maintain level flight, not enough for maneuvering. Engine start. Instruments check normal. Radio check. Oxygen flow confirmed. Pressurization system armed. Camera activated. Film magazine loaded with 12,000 feet of high-resolution film capable of resolving objects 8 inches across from 70,000 feet altitude. At 5:20 a.m. local time, 6:20 a.m. Moscow time, Powers releases the brakes. The U-2 accelerates slowly. Thrust-to-weight ratio is poor when carrying maximum fuel. 80 knots, 90 knots, 100 knots. When at 105 knots, the wings generate enough lift. The aircraft rises into the air. The pogo sticks that support the wingtips fall away as designed. The U-2 is airborne. Powers retracts the landing gear. The wheels drop into the desert, and ground crew will recover them later. The U-2 climbs at 3,000 feet per minute. At this rate, reaching 70,000 feet will take 23 minutes. The sun rises as Powers crosses into Afghanistan. Orange light floods the cockpit. He switches the faceplate to dark tint. Altitude 40,000 feet, climbing. Temperature outside, minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. Without the pressure suit, he would be dead in 30 seconds.
At 7:10 a.m., Powers levels off at 70,500 feet. Altitude, where the sky turns dark purple, where stars are visible during daytime,
where the curvature of the Earth is a visible arc on the horizon. He crosses the Soviet border at 7:37 a.m. Soviet radar picks him up immediately. At Air Defense Headquarters in Moscow, controllers watch the track on their screens. Unidentified aircraft. Speed, 460 miles per hour. Altitude, 70,500 feet. Heading northeast. Clearly hostile. Clearly American. MiG-19 fighters scramble from airfields near the border. They climb to maximum altitude, 57,000 feet, and watch helplessly as the U-2 passes overhead, 13,000 feet above them. Too high to reach, too high to shoot. SA-2 guideline missile batteries go on alert. The SA-2 is the Soviet Union's newest surface-to-air missile. First deployed in 1957. Maximum altitude, 65,000 feet, according to design specifications. But the Soviets have been working on improvements. Higher thrust motors, better radar guidance. And on May 1, 1960, they're about to test whether those improvements work. Powers, unaware of the activity below, activates the camera. The drift sight shows the landscape scrolling past at 460 miles per hour. Industrial complexes, railroad junctions, military bases. The camera clicks steadily, recording everything on high-resolution film. At 8:35 a.m., Powers approaches Tyuratam. The Soviet missile test facility spreads across hundreds of square miles. Launch pads, assembly buildings, fuel storage tanks. The camera captures it all. This single pass will provide U.S. intelligence with more information about Soviet missile capabilities than 6 months of satellite photography could provide, if satellites existed, which they don't in 1960. Powers banks slightly to the right, adjusting course toward Sverdlovsk. Fuel consumption is normal, oxygen supply is normal. Everything is proceeding exactly as planned.
At 8:50 a.m., he reaches Sverdlovsk. Below him, 14 SA-2 missile batteries have been tracking his progress for the last hour. Battalion Commander Major Mikhail Voronov receives authorization from Moscow to engage. At 8:53 a.m., the first missile launches. Then another. Then another. 14 missiles in total. White contrails rising from the ground at Mach 3.5. Each missile carries a 440-pound high-explosive fragmentation warhead designed to destroy aircraft at extreme altitude. Powers doesn't see the launches. At 70,000 feet, you're above 99.7% of Earth's atmosphere. Sound doesn't travel. Radio waves from ground-based early warning systems don't reach you. You fly in silence, in darkness, completely isolated from the world below. The SA-2 missiles climb. 60,000 feet, 65,000 feet. Most of them reach their maximum altitude and detonate harmlessly, too far from the target, but one missile, guided by radar that has been tracking the U-2 for 57 minutes, reaches 70,000 feet. 600 feet behind Powers' aircraft, the warhead detonates. The blast wave travels at 7,000 feet per second. It hits the U-2's tail section first. Aluminum skin, thin as paper, crumples. The vertical stabilizer separates. Hydraulic lines rupture. Control cables snap. Powers feels the aircraft shudder. No sound, the blast is too far away. Just a vibration. Then the control stick goes dead in his hand. The U-2 kitches nose down and enters a spin. The cockpit becomes chaos. Loose items, maps, pens, checklist cards float in 0 G as the aircraft tumbles. The altimeter unwinds. 68,000 feet, 65,000 feet, 60,000 feet. Descent rate 5,000 feet per minute and accelerating. Powers' training takes over. Stabilize the spin, but the controls don't respond. The stick moves freely without effect. The tail is gone. The aircraft is unflyable. He reaches for the self-destruct switches. 2 switches guarded by metal covers. Lift the covers. Flip both switches. Timer activates. 70 seconds until detonation. Supposed to be enough time to eject.
But the spin has him pinned against the canopy. The aircraft is rotating 3 times per second. Centrifugal force presses him against the right side of the cockpit with a force equivalent to 4 times his body weight. His right arm, extended toward the destruct switches, weighs 60 pounds. He can't move it. Altitude, 55,000 feet. Powers tries a different approach. Release the seat harness, open the canopy, eject manually. But the ejection seat in the U-2 fires downward through the floor. Standard procedure is to separate from the aircraft first, then pull the ejection handle. But separation requires getting out of the aircraft, and getting out requires releasing the harness, and releasing the harness while the aircraft is spinning will throw him around the cockpit like a rag doll. Altitude, 45,000 feet. No choice. He releases the seat harness. Immediately, the spin throws him upward. His helmet hits the canopy. He reaches up, finds the canopy jettison handle, pulls it. The canopy tears away. Wind blast hits him at 300 miles per hour. The noise is incredible, the howl of wind, the scream of the failing engine. The spin throws him halfway out of the cockpit, but his oxygen hose is still connected. The hose catches on the seat frame. He's trapped, half in and half out of the aircraft, being strangled by his own oxygen line. Altitude, 35,000 feet. Powers reaches down, finds the oxygen connector, twists it. The hose disconnects. Immediately, he's sucked out of the aircraft by the 300-mile-per-hour wind. He tumbles through the air completely disoriented. No sense of up or down, just spinning, falling, freezing. His pressure suit has an emergency oxygen bottle, 3 minutes of air. He finds the activation valve, turns it, oxygen flows. He can breathe. Altitude, 30,000 feet. The U-2's emergency parachute system activates automatically at 15,000 feet. Powers is conscious but disoriented when the main parachute opens with a violent jerk. Suddenly, everything is quiet. No wind. No engine noise. Just the sound of his own breathing inside the helmet.
He looks up. White parachute canopy. Looks down. Green landscape, approaching slowly. He's descending at 18 feet per second. Impact in approximately 8 minutes. Below him, the U-2 hits the ground near the village of Kosalino and explodes. Fireball visible for 10 miles. But the self-destruct charge never detonated. The aircraft is destroyed by impact, not by Powers' destruct switches. Which means the camera is intact. The film is intact. The wreckage will tell the Soviets everything about U-2 capabilities. Powers reaches into his survival vest. Inside is a silver dollar with a hidden compartment. Inside the compartment is a needle coated with saxitoxin, a poison derived from shellfish. Death in 15 seconds. Undetectable in autopsy. The CIA issues these to pilots flying over denied territory. If capture seems certain, if interrogation seems imminent, if giving up secrets seems inevitable, use the needle. Powers holds the silver dollar. Considers it. Decides against it. He lands in a plowed field at 9:03 a.m. local time. The impact knocks the wind out of him, but causes no injury. He stands up, begins gathering his parachute, looks around. 3 Soviet farmers are running across the field toward him. They're shouting in Russian. Powers doesn't speak Russian, but their intent is clear. Stay where you are. Powers considers running. He's in good physical condition. The farmers are older. He might escape into the forest visible a half-mile away. Then what? He's in the middle of the Soviet Union, 300 miles from the nearest border, wearing a silver pressure suit that makes him visible for miles. He wouldn't last a day. The farmers reach him. One of them, a man in his 50s, asks in broken English, "American?" Powers trained to resist interrogation, trained to provide only name, rank, and serial number, trained to reveal nothing under any circumstances, tells the truth. Yes, American. Within an hour, Soviet military trucks arrive. Within 3 hours, Powers is in a car heading to Moscow. Within 6 hours, he's in KGB headquarters at Lubyanka Prison, beginning what will be 61 days of interrogation.
The interrogation room is 12 feet by 8 feet, concrete floor, metal table, 2 chairs, 1 window, barred and frosted. Temperature, 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Deliberately cold. Makes prisoners uncomfortable. Makes them want to cooperate to get somewhere warm. Powers sits in the uncomfortable chair, still wearing the pressure suit. They haven't let him change. Across from him sits a KGB officer who introduces himself as Colonel Andropov. Not the famous Yuri Andropov, who will later become Soviet leader. Different person, same last name. Andropov speaks perfect English, American accent. Powers guesses the colonel spent time in the United States, probably undercover, probably as a spy. "Mr. Powers," Andropov begins. Not Lieutenant Powers or Captain Powers. The Soviets know he's not active military, know he works for the CIA, know exactly what his mission was. "You were shot down at 8:55 a.m. Moscow time over Sverdlovsk Oblast. Your aircraft was flying at 70,500 feet on a heading of 037 degrees. Your speed was 460 miles per hour. You departed from Peshawar, Pakistan. You are heading toward Bodo, Norway. Your mission was photographic reconnaissance of Soviet military installations. Do you deny any of this?" Powers says nothing. Name, rank, serial number only. Andropov opens a folder, pulls out photographs, aerial photographs. "These are from your aircraft. We recovered the camera. The film was intact. 4,200 frames. Missile sites, airfields, industrial complexes, very high quality. Your CIA will be disappointed to learn they won't be receiving these." Powers still says nothing. Andropov changes approach. "Mr. Powers, let me explain your situation. Under Soviet law, espionage carries the death penalty. You were caught conducting espionage against the Soviet Union. You will be tried. You will be convicted. The question is whether you will be executed or whether you will be imprisoned. That depends on your cooperation."
"I was following orders," Powers says. First words he's spoken since capture. "Yes, CIA orders, which means you are a spy, which means death penalty. I'm a civilian pilot. I was conducting weather reconnaissance." Andropov smiles, not friendly. "Mr. Powers, we have your aircraft. We have your camera. We have photographs of Soviet military bases. We have your survival kit with the poison needle and the silk map of the USSR. We have sworn statements from 3 farmers who saw you parachute from a military reconnaissance aircraft.
Please don't insult my intelligence with weather reconnaissance. Powers realizes resistance is pointless. The Soviets have everything. They don't need his confession. They already have the evidence. Over the next 61 days, Powers tells them everything. Not because of torture. The KGB doesn't torture him. They don't need to. The evidence is overwhelming. Powers tells them about the CIA recruitment, the training at Groom Lake, the missions from Turkey and Pakistan, the camera systems, the navigation procedures, the emergency protocols. He doesn't give them anything they don't already know. The wreckage of the U-2 has already told them all the technical details. Powers simply confirms what they've already discovered. On May 5th, 4 days after the shootdown, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev stands before the Supreme Soviet in Moscow and announces to the world that a U.S. reconnaissance aircraft has been shot down over Soviet territory. In Washington, President Eisenhower's administration issues a cover story. A NASA weather research plane, flying from Turkey, may have accidentally drifted into Soviet airspace after the pilot reported oxygen problems. The pilot is presumed dead. On May 7th, Khrushchev springs his trap. He announces that the pilot is alive, that he has confessed, that he was flying for the CIA, that his aircraft was equipped with sophisticated surveillance cameras, that the United States has been conducting illegal spy flights over the Soviet Union for years.
The Eisenhower administration's cover story collapses. For the first time in history, the U.S. government publicly admits to conducting espionage operations. The political fallout is massive. A summit meeting between Eisenhower and Khrushchev, scheduled for May 16th in Paris, is supposed to ease Cold War tensions. Instead, Khrushchev uses the U-2 incident to sabotage the summit. He demands an apology. Eisenhower refuses. The summit collapses before it begins. Cold War tensions, instead of easing, intensify. The Soviets use the incident as propaganda. American imperialists violate Soviet airspace. American warmongers prepare for nuclear war. U.S.-Soviet relations, fragile to begin with, freeze completely. And, in a cell in Lubyanka prison, Francis Gary Powers waits for trial.
August 19th, 1960. Hall of Columns, Moscow. The trial of Francis Gary Powers begins, not in a courtroom, in a grand hall with marble columns and chandeliers. The proceedings are broadcast on Soviet radio, televised on Soviet television. This is a show trial. The verdict is predetermined. The purpose is propaganda. Powers sits in a cage, literally, a wooden cage in the center of the hall with bars and a door, standard Soviet procedure for accused criminals. Powers wears a dark suit provided by his captors. He looks thin. He's lost 20 pounds during 3 months of imprisonment. The presiding judge is Lieutenant General V.V. Borisoglebsky. 3-judge panel, no jury. Soviet legal system doesn't use juries for state crimes. The prosecutor is Roman Rudenko, who previously prosecuted Nazi war criminals at Nuremberg. He's experienced at making defendants look evil. The charges are read. Article 2 of the Soviet Law on Criminal Responsibility for State Crimes. Espionage. Maximum penalty, death by shooting. Powers' defense attorney is Mikhail Grinyev, appointed by the Soviet government. Grinyev is competent, but has an impossible task. The evidence is overwhelming. The defendant has confessed. The best Grinyev can do is argue for leniency. The trial lasts 3 days. Witnesses testify. The farmers who saw Powers land. The soldiers who captured him. The technicians who examined the aircraft wreckage. Each witness adds another piece to the prosecution's case. On day 2, Powers himself testifies. He confirms everything. Yes, he worked for the CIA. Yes, he flew reconnaissance missions over the Soviet Union. Yes, his mission on May 1st was to photograph military installations. Yes, he knew this was illegal under international law. Rudenko, the prosecutor, asks, "Did you believe you were committing a crime against the Soviet people?" Powers, "I was following orders. I believed I was serving my country." Rudenko, "By violating Soviet airspace, by photographing Soviet military secrets, by acting as a spy." Powers, "Yes." The courtroom is packed with Soviet citizens, carefully selected for political reliability. They watch silently, no outbursts, no emotions. This is the Soviet Union. You don't show emotion at state trials.
On day 3, the prosecution presents its evidence. Wreckage from the U-2, the camera, the film, the photographs, the survival kit with the poison needle, the silk map, the gold coins designed to bribe Soviet citizens if Powers needed help escaping. Rudenko holds up the silver dollar with the hidden poison needle. "This," he says, "is what the CIA gives its pilots, a suicide device. Because American leaders know that their espionage operations are criminal, know that their pilots will be captured, know that death is preferable to Soviet justice." Powers' attorney argues that Powers should not receive the death penalty. His client cooperated fully with Soviet authorities, provided valuable information, showed remorse for his actions. Under Soviet law, cooperation and remorse are mitigating factors. On August 19th, the 3-judge panel delivers its verdict. Guilty of espionage under Article 2. Sentence, 10 years. 3 years in prison, 7 years in a labor camp. Not death. The Soviets have decided that Powers is more valuable alive than dead. Alive, he can be exchanged for a Soviet spy captured in the West. Dead, he's just propaganda. Powers is transferred to Vladimir Prison, 120 miles east of Moscow. The prison houses political prisoners, dissidents, refuseniks, foreign spies. The cells are small, 6 feet by 8 feet, concrete floor, metal bed frame with thin mattress, bucket for waste. 1 meal per day, black bread, thin soup, occasional fish or potato. Powers adapts to prison life. He's methodical by nature, creates a routine. Exercise in the morning, push-ups, sit-ups, running in place. Reading in the afternoon. The prison library has books in English. Sleep at night. Every day the same. Routine keeps him sane. He receives letters from his wife, Barbara. She writes every week, tells him about life in the United States, the controversy surrounding his capture, the investigations, the congressional hearings asking whether he should have used the poison needle instead of allowing himself to be captured, the accusations that he gave up too much information under interrogation. Powers writes back, tells her he did what he thought was right, tells her he doesn't regret choosing life over death, tells her to ignore the criticism. But the criticism stings. In the United States, many people view Powers as a coward. He should have destroyed the aircraft, should have killed himself, should have resisted interrogation. The fact that he survived, that he confessed, that he cooperated, to some Americans this makes him a traitor. The CIA knows better. Agency lawyers have reviewed Powers' debriefings, concluded that he revealed nothing the Soviets didn't already know from the aircraft wreckage, concluded that he followed his training correctly. The standing orders for U-2 pilots are to survive if possible, resist if reasonable, but don't die unnecessarily. But public perception is different from CIA assessment, and public perception is what Powers will have to live with. February 10th, 1962, 8:36 a.m. Berlin time. Glienicke Bridge, connecting Potsdam in East Germany to West Berlin. The bridge is 390 feet long, painted green, and spans the Havel River. During the Cold War, it's used for exactly one purpose: exchanging captured spies. On the east side of the bridge, Francis Gary Powers stands between two KGB officers. He's wearing a thick coat provided by his captors. Temperature, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Light snow falling. Powers has been in Soviet captivity for 1 year, 9 months, and 10 days. On the west side of the bridge, Rudolf Abel stands between two CIA officers. Abel is a Soviet KGB colonel, arrested in Brooklyn in 1957, convicted of espionage, sentenced to 30 years. He spent 4 years in U.S. prisons waiting for this moment. The exchange has been negotiated over months. CIA lawyer Milan Miskovsky worked with Abel's attorney, James B. Donovan, to arrange the swap. Donovan is the same lawyer who defended Abel in court, who argued against the death penalty, specifically for this purpose, so Abel could be traded someday for an American prisoner. At 8:52 a.m., officials from both sides walk to the center of the bridge. They verify identities, check documents, confirm that both prisoners are in acceptable condition. At 9:04 a.m., the exchange begins. Powers walks west. Abel walks east. They pass each other in the middle of the bridge. Neither man speaks, neither man acknowledges the other. Powers later says he barely noticed Abel. His attention was focused on the American officials waiting on the west side. Powers reaches the west side at 9:07 a.m. The first question the CIA officer asks, "Are you Francis Gary Powers?" "Yes." "You're free." Powers doesn't feel free. He feels numb. 21 months of imprisonment, 21 months of uncertainty, and now it's over. Just like that. Walk across a bridge, suddenly free. The CIA takes him to a safe house in West Berlin. Medical examination, debriefing, questions about his treatment, questions about what he told the Soviets, questions about his physical and mental condition. Powers is healthy, thin. He weighs 155 pounds, down from 175 before capture, but healthy. No signs of torture, no signs of abuse. The Soviets treated him as a valuable asset, not as an enemy to be destroyed.
The CIA is satisfied. Powers followed orders, survived, didn't give away critical secrets. By CIA standards, he performed correctly. But the American public doesn't see it that way. Powers returns to the United States on February 12th, lands at Dover Air Force Base, Delaware. No public ceremony, no welcome home parade. The CIA wants to keep his return low-key, avoid media attention, avoid uncomfortable questions. It doesn't work. The media swarms. Reporters ask, "Why did you confess? Why didn't you destroy the aircraft? Why didn't you use the poison needle?" Powers answers honestly, "I wanted to live." Some people understand. Most don't. In 1962, Cold War America expects its pilots to choose death over capture. The fact that Powers chose differently makes him suspect. The Senate Armed Services Committee holds hearings in March 1962. Powers testifies for 5 days. Senators ask detailed questions about the mission, the shootdown, the interrogation, his cooperation with the Soviets. The committee's final report concludes that Powers acted in accordance with his instructions and complied with his obligations as an American under the circumstances. Translation: he did nothing wrong. But the report is classified. The public never sees it. What the public sees are headlines like "U-2 pilot defends survival decision" and "Powers denies giving Soviet secrets." The headlines sound defensive, sound like a man with something to hide. Powers tries to resume normal life. The CIA terminates his employment. He's too famous now, too controversial for covert work. Lockheed offers him a job as a test pilot. He accepts, moves to California, tries to put the U-2 incident behind him. It doesn't work. Everywhere he goes, people recognize him. Some approach to shake his hand, others turn away. The pilot who survived instead of dying heroically. The pilot who confessed instead of resisting. The pilot who disappointed America. Powers writes a book in 1970, Operation Overflight. It's his attempt to tell his story, to explain his decisions, to defend his actions. The book receives mixed reviews. Some readers sympathize, others criticize. The controversy never ends.
August 1st, 1977. Van Nuys, California, 2:30 p.m. Pacific Time. Francis Gary Powers, now age 47, is piloting a helicopter for KNBC television station. Traffic reporting. Standard afternoon shift. He's been flying helicopters for KNBC for 3 years. Good job, steady income, flying, which is what he loves. The helicopter is a Bell 206 Jet Ranger. Registration, N4TV. 4 passengers aboard, Powers, a cameraman, and 2 KNBC executives being given a demonstration flight. They're flying over Encino, a suburb in the San Fernando Valley. At 2:31 p.m., the helicopter's engine fails. Witnesses on the ground hear the engine sputter, then go silent. The helicopter begins auto-rotating, a controlled descent using the rotor blades as a parachute. Powers has 30 seconds to find a landing spot. Below him, houses, streets, power lines, trees. No good options. He aims for a Little League baseball field. Clear space, flat, no obstacles. He almost makes it. At 200 feet altitude, the helicopter strikes a utility pole. The rotor blades disintegrate. The helicopter drops vertically and hits the ground in a parking lot adjacent to the baseball field. Impact speed, 60 miles per hour. The helicopter explodes. Fuel tank ruptures. Fire spreads instantly. Powers and the cameraman, George Spears, die on impact. The 2 passengers in the back seats survive with serious injuries. The National Transportation Safety Board investigates. Conclusion: the helicopter ran out of fuel. The fuel gauge showed 30 minutes of fuel remaining, but the fuel gauge was malfunctioning. The actual fuel level was 0. Powers, methodical as always, had checked the fuel gauge before takeoff, trusted the instrument. The instrument lied. At 70,000 feet over the Soviet Union, Powers survived missiles, survived a spin, survived capture and imprisonment. At 200 feet over California, a faulty fuel gauge killed him. The funeral is at Arlington National Cemetery. Full military honors. The U.S. government, which once questioned his actions, now recognizes his service. Flag-draped coffin. 3-volley salute. Bugler plays taps. In 2000, 23 years after his death, Powers receives additional recognition. The CIA posthumously awards him the Director's Medal for Extreme Fidelity and Extraordinary Courage. The citation reads, "His patriotism and service to his country were unwavering." In 2012, 52 years after the shootdown, Powers receives the Silver Star. The U.S. Air Force, which once distanced itself from the CIA's U-2 program, now claims him as one of their own. The citation acknowledges heroism in aerial flight and dedication to his country in a time of great peril. Too late to matter to Powers, but perhaps it matters to history.
The wreckage of Powers' U-2 is displayed in Moscow at the Central Armed Forces Museum. Sections of wing, pieces of fuselage, the camera that photographed Soviet military installations, the survival kit with the poison needle Powers refused to use. Russian visitors walk past the display without knowing the full story. They see a spy plane, an American imperialist tool, a symbol of Cold War aggression. They don't know about Francis Gary Powers from Kentucky, the coal miner's son who wanted to fly, the methodical pilot who followed orders, the man who chose survival over suicide and spent the rest of his life defending that choice. At the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, Powers' name is inscribed on the memorial wall, one star among 140 stars representing CIA officers who died in the line of duty. Below the stars, the Book of Honor lists names. Some names are still classified. Powers' name is public. In Pound, Virginia, near where Powers grew up, a small museum displays artifacts from his life: flight suit, medals, photographs, letters from prison. The museum receives about 3,000 visitors per year. Most are aviation enthusiasts. Some are history students. A few are people who remember May 1st, 1960, and wanted to know what happened to the pilot who fell from 70,000 feet. The U-2, the aircraft that carried Powers into Soviet airspace, still flies. Updated versions with modern engines, modern cameras, modern electronics. But the basic design remains: long wings, single engine, one pilot at extreme altitude, where the sky turns black and the earth curves below. Current U-2 pilots flying reconnaissance missions over Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria know the story of Francis Gary Powers, know what happened when altitude wasn't enough, know that enemy technology eventually catches up, know that survival sometimes requires harder choices than death. If this story resonates with you, if you found yourself thinking about the impossible choices people face in war, the cost of following orders, the difference between heroism and survival, hit that like button. It signals to YouTube that stories like this deserve to be told. Real stories, complex stories, stories without simple heroes or villains. Subscribe to this channel for more forgotten histories from the Cold War. The next video will examine another classified incident that remained secret for decades. Another pilot, another impossible situation, another choice between duty and survival. And write in the comments, do you think Powers made the right decision? Should he have destroyed the aircraft even if it meant certain death? Should he have resisted interrogation regardless of consequences? There's no correct answer, but the question is worth asking. Because 50 years from now, someone else will face a similar choice. Alone, at altitude, with seconds to decide. And they'll have to live with whatever they choose. Francis Gary Powers chose to live and spent 17 years afterward explaining why.